Hey everyone, before we start the episode, I just wanted to give you a rundown of what we'll be doing for the next few weeks. This episode is about the first two parts of the limited series, Howard's End, episodes 1 and 2. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to cover episodes 3 and 4 of Howard's End. And then we're moving on to Jane Austen, and we're going to start with Sense and Sensibility. On May 14th, we're going to discuss the book. And then on the end of May, 2 weeks after that, we are going to cover the film Sense and Sensibility, adapted by and starring Emma Thompson. We're so excited about that. All right, let's get on with the episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Can I Just Say? From Common Room Radio. I'm Elizabeth Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive, and we're covering, finally, I feel like we've been talking about this forever. We're covering the BBC One/Starz limited series of Howard's End. For those of you who missed it, in our last episode, we covered the book Howard's End by E.M. Forster. And we're really excited to talk about the limited series now. But first, Liz, do we have any reviews?
We do have a new review from March 6th. This is from, says Rebecca Avis, or Rebecca This on iTunes here, who gives us 5 stars and says, "What I love the most about Can I Just Say is Daphne's and Elizabeth's informed analysis, which often gives me a whole new insight into media that I enjoy. Recent highlights have included discussions about The Godfather as an immigrant story and the visual motifs of Baz Luhrmann, and I can't wait for more."
Oh, thank you.
That's very sweet, Rebecca. Thank you.
So sweet. So yes, this means that we have an opening. If anyone wants to leave us a review in the next 2 weeks, we will read it when we do the second half of our Howard's End discussion. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's maybe start with first impressions. What's your first impression of the first 2 episodes of this series?
First impression is that it's one of the most gorgeous things I've ever seen done. It's beautiful and perfect, and I'm in love.
All right, then. Well, that's quite
second only to Black Sails.
Wow. I don't know if I could go that far. I mean, definitely Black Sails is my favorite.
Your first love. We all know.
It is my one true love.
Exactly.
I do like this a whole lot, and it is beautiful, and
it's gorgeous.
And yeah, I don't know if I'll go quite that far, although I don't feel like I have like a lot of criticisms about it.
This was
like
made
it
for
a
me,
whole
though.
lot. Yes, it is definitely made for you. I like it a whole lot, and I'm not like, going crazy about it, but I knew you would.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just heard Haley Atwell and period drama, and I'm in anyway.
Right.
But it's
exactly
gorgeously done. I'm really, really enjoying the run.
So can we start by talking about the colors? Because I would really like to
start
talk
with
about
that. Okay.
No, we don't have to. I'm
no.
very
Let's start
focused
really quick by just covering how gorgeous the opening credits are.
Okay. Sure.
I really thought that was so thoughtfully done and set the tone beautifully. I love how you've got the book pages, which is so gorgeous. And then we get all these little shots of Howard's End and some of the characters. The music is gorgeous. I thought it set the tone beautifully.
Excellent. I don't have strong feelings about it.
Okay.
But let's not start with the colors, because now I'm clearly we didn't look at each other's notes. Like, clearly you had a whole thing. Well, I have a lot to say about the colors.
I have a lot to say about the colors, but that's okay. We can start there.
No, I actually want to start with the very opening of the first episode. I loved, and I mean, I'm assuming you also, but like, I was very much keeping in mind our discussion of the book.
Yes.
When we're going to be talking about this, like, I feel like a lot of what I want to say is talking about it as adaptation.
Yes.
And whether or not I feel like it definitely hit some of the stuff that was really important to me about the book, and did not so much hit other stuff that's really important to me about the book.
Fascinating. Okay.
But I do love the opening. I love that we have the postman walking, and then suddenly he's kind of surrounded and befuddled by these 2 automobiles. And that was so perfect with the whole aspect of the book of how, newness and change and industry is kind of, imposing itself, like the tearing
is
down of
gorgeous.
houses and the car. I mean, I don't even think we discussed it. Like one of my favorite things in the book was this whole imagery about how cars like make all this dust that kind of, that kind of coats the countryside and coats people.
And noise.
Right. So I really love that we started straight off with that. Like I remember when I first watched it, I was like, okay, definitely this aspect of what is important to me about the book is something that's clearly important to the show as well.
Yeah. I thought it was a beautiful adaptive. Yeah. It was such a perfect adaptation of that opening line when you see the postman's shoulders just walking in front of you. And I swear I heard it in my head. One may as well begin with Helen's letters to her sister. It was perfect. Yeah. A beautiful, just an exact visual representation of the opening line.
Well, and it's funny because, because they have to condense the book to get to a show, I really enjoyed like their little mesh mailbox and how that ended up being like this transition from one bit to another. There's just like, there are a lot of letters in the book, but there's just so much book that it doesn't like, it feels important in the beginning, but you don't feel like, oh, and another letter and another letter and another letter. But the first 2 episodes, I feel like we had so many moments like of these transitions where suddenly you see a letter appear in the mailbox through the slot. And I just really loved that as this recurring thing happening because so much about this story is about communication and connection.
Oh, what a great point. Yeah.
So I just thought that was just right on. That just really worked for me. Like I loved it the first time because for the same reason, because that's how the book starts. But also then I just loved that it kept being the thing that kind of marked a new moment in the story.
Sure. Like a new chapter. That's lovely. Yeah.
Okay, let's just talk about the colors now.
Okay, if we want to jump straight to colors. No, yeah. I'm just going to open my notes. That's okay.
Colors are very, very important to me. And they did it really beautifully.
So gorgeously. Well, especially I think we should remind everyone, especially if there's anybody who just skipped the book that we did, of the talk of color in the novel. And we talked specifically about rainbows and about meeting other people and making different connections, adding color into the daily gray.
Exactly. And Meg, in particular, Margaret had this whole thing about she actually associated color with realization and with noticing, a word that was very important in the book as well, that this had to do, do with like almost like being awake and aware.
Woke AF. Yes.
Yep, exactly. So color is extremely important in the book. Like, I don't feel like it's not, oh, maybe it is. It's mentioned quite a bit. I mean, I feel like, there's sometimes there's themes that like really like show up almost all the time in a book, but it was so clear how important this was to Margaret, I think in particular, like to Margaret's worldview in particular. And
I think any careful read, you'll pick up on the color theme.
Right, exactly. And it's but it's not specific colors like in the show. The show is using colors to demarcate things.
Yes.
So precisely.
And gorgeously. Yes.
Can I talk for a second as a person who has painted and does color like with the colors they chose? Okay,
Please do.
So I mean, the thing I'm sure that we're both referencing in particular is the color red.
Red in particular.
Right.
Yes.
So the Schlegels are red.
Yes.
Period. The Schlegels are red, but also their house. And it's not just red. Like the red is really a marked thing. But the fact that the red is always paired with green and blue-green, which are actually, those are complementary colors.
Oh, on the wheel.
The colors, right, exactly. So like when you learned your colors, when you were learning to paint at any point in school, complementary colors resonate with each other. Like that is the thing that they really make each other stand out. And when you're doing something visual, that's a choice you'll make to make those. So if you put like a red next to an orange, like they don't pop the same way.
Right.
Whereas if you put a red next to a green or next to that blue, which I meant to remind myself what the name, and also, but it's not just the name, like in their house, it's that very
paint color that I want.
Right.
I don't even
it's
know.
That paint color. Right. Shoot. I know the name of that blue, but it's like a blue with a lot of green in it, which is very much, it's funny. it really stuck out for me because when I used to paint, I used to actually use red and that exact blue against each other all the time.
Wonderful.
And so
Why
it's
haven't I
not,
never seen any of your painting?
I don't know.
Well, please.
They're not that great.
That's okay. I'm interested anyway.
So it's not just like red always kind of pops and resonates with people and is a color that has a lot of all sorts of meanings to all sorts of people. But for me, what was fascinating was it was also their house. It wasn't just that the girls both wore red. It's that the house itself had a lot of red and that blue or red and green.
And
so
just
it was
rich
almost,
colors in general.
Right. So it's almost like there was an electricity happening in the house that these colors were kind of augmenting in a way visually, even if you didn't necessarily notice it, it was going to affect you, especially compared to the very dark woods that you have at, so like, also like, oh God, yeah, it's true. We have to like talk for people who didn't read the book. So like we had associated Howard's End, the place, with this idea of Ruth Wilcox or Mrs. Wilcox, whoever Mrs. Wilcox is at the time, of being connected to the earth. So it makes sense that Howard's End, the interior of it, would be very natural, would be wood colors and things like that. Mm-hmm. And the Wilcox's house was very what's the word? Neutrals, was full of neutrals. So like you had their house full of neutrals, neutral colors that kind of all just kind of are very soothing. It's a very different kind of thing versus the Schlegel's house, which is all these contrasty colors that are really kind of creating kind of a visual electric experience.
Mm-hmm. I like that very much. I also noticed that they gave Leonard Bast a lot of gray and dull, not in his
black
house,
and white,
but there was a lot of black and white. I love the scene where all the clerks are exiting together.
Yep.
And it's almost monochromatic. It's almost like they turned the color way down. I bet that they did. It's gorgeously done.
Yep. Right. So you have that versus, and the two umbrellas, that his umbrella, the one that Helen stole,
Black
was a
and
black,
tattered.
right. And Margaret's umbrella is red.
Bright red. I have an umbrella just like that, and I'm so pleased to have it.
But I love that because it really is, I mean, it's part of saying this about the characters, but it's also, in a way, for me, speaking from the point of view of the Schlegels, is that they see themselves as, I mean, they have a conflicted view of themselves, but they do see themselves as exceptional and different. And this is different than the discussion of the exceptional woman, but they see themselves as intellectuals, as kind of exceptional. So I think in their worldview, the Leonard Basts of the world are all somewhat interchangeable. Yes. And that's why all the black and white, like, you know, when it's
that's interesting.
When someone is your social project, they're not 100% human for you.
Which I love that he said that. You have me as, what do you say, cast as this comic character? And you start trying to say, no, we don't. Yes, you do. And I love that this followed so quickly by Margaret telling Helen, don't talk to the Wilcoxes about Mr. Bast. They don't understand him.
And she had
Neither
called him
do
a
you,
creature,
Margaret.
which I think, might be just no, I think that's an Englishism.
It's like a little pet name.
Right,
yeah,
exactly. Well,
still.
Again, he's their pet. I mean, that's the
He
thing.
is.
It's the same as the social project. And then I feel like they did an amazing job. I resisted the urge to go back and read stuff after watching and like to just go on my impressions of the book. But I feel like that scene, the one with the hat, when she wants to get, when he's waiting to get his hat and then he says, Miss Schlegel, all I can do is leave. Mm-hmm. And that scene is just amazing. We have a lot of silence in that scene too.
Yes.
Like it's a
lot of awkwardness.
So perfectly awkward. It's so perfectly judging of Helen. I'm sorry. It really is. She's trying so hard to tell him that he's not her like pet project. And it's so clear that he is exactly
And then
that.
in comes Tibby and just calls it out precisely for what it is and embarrasses her. But he is right. He's being an asshole, but he's
being
right.
an asshole, but he is right. He's exposing her.
He is exposing her. That's a good point.
He's exposing something that is basically true. And I just feel like it's funny because we spend in the book not a lot of time, but some amount of time in Leonard's POV.
Yes.
And yet that scene for me gave me more empathy for him than I ever had in the book.
No, that's interesting. To me, that is the only scene with Leonard that really works.
Right. It is the only one that really works.
Oh, do you agree?
Yeah, but it really works.
The casting choice, that's the only casting that I wasn't thrilled with.
Oh, really?
So I was watching Howard's End with a couple of friends, and one of them the whole time was certain that Leonard was just this. She kept on calling him skeevy. He's so skeevy. And I do feel like that the actor was portraying this kind of social awkwardness that read as untrustworthy instead of reading as awkward. Oh. And I feel like once I explained to her the interiority that we got, like I paused it and I talked about the way that he worried over the umbrella and the way that he hesitated before he finally went back for it. And that kind of opened the window for her to have compassion for him. But until then, she was just like, I hate this guy.
I can totally get that. And it's funny. I mean, I, of course, watched this having, read the book and seen the film and, read the book a million years ago. My big criticism that I wrote down in my notes about it was that I feel like they made his walking, that, his disappearing, his long walk, they made that about running away from Jackie, which I don't feel like at all what it was about in the book. Like,
well, and they also gave him some theme music that felt a bit sinister, right?
I didn't think about that, but yeah, you're right. I mean, that whole like...
It's supposed to be despairing. I think they were going for despairing and desperation, but they hit on like...
It felt like petulance.
Insidious or petulant or... Yeah.
Which I never felt like was what was going on with Leonard with that walk. No. Like, I think...
That is made explicit in the text.
Right. I think there's a lot of ways to interpret the walk in the book, actually. As, maybe starting with some sort of romanticism on his part because of things he had read and then him being a little disillusioned with that, or just him wandering. I mean, it just didn't feel... It never felt like it was in response to Jackie or his life.
In the book, yeah. It felt very interior, very...
Right, and also very proactive, not reactive. I mean,
interesting.
I mean, the wandering part, no proactive, but I guess not necessarily proactive, but not reactive. Like it was something he was doing with some level of either feeling like a compulsion to do it or choosing to do it, but not in reaction to something.
Not like an escape.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It felt like he was going towards something with some amount of deliberateness, which could be debated, but he's going towards something, not going away from something. And in the show, I feel like it was very much portrayed. And I'm sure that, I mean, it makes sense to me like that would be like a good way to do a shortcut for like how kind of unhappy his life is. Mm-hmm. So that was, kind of a way to do that shortcut.
Yeah.
But I feel like it robbed that point, and also the discussion he had later with the Schlegels to some extent. It robbed both of those very important aspects of his story of what was interesting about them.
Yes. I can't imagine the way to have done that better. But I do think
it's probably very hard to portray. Like I'm just wandering really and I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, but like I just keep wandering.
Sure. Well, I told my friend who was having so much trouble with him, I was like, you need to recast him in your head as a young, somewhat socially awkward and bumbling Benedict Cumberbatch. And as soon as I did that, she was like, so funny. Yes, I see it. So I think some of it is just kind of, again, the energy that, whether it was directed or that the actor chose for Leonard Bast, read as a little bit more sulky, maybe, instead of despairing. And I'm not sure. I do think the music had something to do with that as well.
That's so interesting.
But it's just hard to say. It may have just been the lack. I wonder if smiles from time to time. I can't imagine Leonard Bast smiling either. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure why it left me wanting, but... We still have 2 more episodes to go to, though.
We do still have 2 more episodes. And again, on the flip side, I just felt like the interaction between him and Helen was so spectacular, but it was more about Helen. But it was about Helen. It wasn't really about him. Like she's
kind of a Steen sealer, actually.
Yes, she is. Oh, speaking of
lovely.
which, I should say, and I'm going to put this in the show notes, that I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. It's Philippa Coutard, maybe? I'm not sure.
Maybe. Yeah.
But our dear friend Lauren Sarner actually interviewed her for the New York Post. So I'm going to put that link in the show notes so that people can read that interview.
Yes. Wonderful. Okay. This was gorgeous casting, though, I felt.
Yes.
Yeah, we're just beginning to touch on it. Like I said, Leonard Bass was the one that I had the most trouble connecting to. But again, there are moments like that scene with the hat that I see Leonard as I remember him in the book.
Right. Well, and as much as you love Haley Atwell, I think actually Philippa, that I don't know how to pronounce her last name.
Yeah.
She not only is a scene stealer, like she blew me away. There were moments like when they realized that the Wilcoxes were going to move across the street.
Yes.
And I could watch her face in that scene a million times and try to figure out all of the emotions that are happening at once, because it's like, that's something, I mean, I feel like she answered questions for me, even though it was like still like so many emotions at one time. I feel like she answered questions for me that I didn't know what Helen was feeling in the book at that moment. Like you really, because you're never in Helen's POV. You're only you're only experiencing Helen from Margaret. So she had to really fill in the blanks there. I was like, was Helen actually heartbroken? Did she not care? Was she just uncomfortable because Margaret and their aunt was uncomfortable? And she somehow managed to cover all of those bases.
All of them. Mm-hmm.
All of them.
No,
so I guess she answered
face.
nothing in a way, but yet it was so satisfying. Like her face was incredible.
Absolutely.
Incredible. I'm still thinking about this. I can't stop thinking about that one moment and how real it felt. It was just like, I just so understood Helen in that moment. And anyone who did listen to our last episodes knows that I love Helen, and I also am very critical of Helen. So it's really good for me to have moments where I can really connect with Helen.
The actress also did so beautifully at playing young.
Yeah.
I felt like, especially in those moments whenever you saw her with Mr. Wilcox, or whenever she was lovingly corrected by Margaret, and you saw her like process that and then take the correction and then move forward and then feel bad about it or whatever it was. Like I really saw Helen just doing her best, like trying to be good, trying to learn. I think so that hard. We see her intent so clearly through the portrayal. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in here. I want to talk about one other character in the actor's portrayal, and then I want to talk about my favorite one.
Okay.
So the first one that I was really so happy to see fleshed out was Jackie. How do you feel about Jackie?
Okay, this one is hard. I feel like I have things to say about it, and I don't, but I haven't completely figured out my opinion about it. I want to start by saying that the actress is terrific, and we should definitely talk about that. But before we talk about that, I am kind of uncomfortable with the casting, not because I don't think it's fabulous that they cast a Black actress as Jackie, but because they didn't change anything about the story to make it about a Black woman. So what they did was they put a Black actress in and didn't address race. And so you would think that in the early 1900s in London, being Black was just like being white.
Oh, I didn't necessarily get that, only because it was clear that he looked at her as like a second-class citizen, and I thought that they could. But you think because it wasn't addressed, it was disrespectful?
That was right. I mean, she's white in the book, and it's the exact same thing. There's never any discussion of like specific stuff to the fact that she was Black and the fact that the maid is Black. Like, I feel like if anything, it just served to censor the Schlegels more, which means they put two Black actresses in to tell the white actress's story.
I see that. That's a valid criticism. Well, it's so tricky in adaptation because you want the art and the literature to speak for itself. But once you, again, put skin on, once you like put a character into the body of another person, that person's culture and connotations carry into the role and influence the role, which can be done beautifully or can be done in a way that is colorblind and therefore
Right.
what's just a little bit irresponsible. I think
It is irresponsible.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I see. I like on the one side, I am always happy to have representation in a show, but on the flip side, I don't feel like this was like, I'm happy for those actresses, and yet it doesn't feel to me like representation. And I've not researched early 1900s London and what the experience of Black women would be there.
Right. Yeah.
But it's hard for me to imagine that the Jackie of the book could just be transposed onto a Black woman and have her have it only be about class and not about race, which is what I feel like we've experienced so far in the show. Like, and I feel like the problem there is that we get no information about what the experience of a Black woman would be.
Yeah.
And again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe London in the early 1900s, nobody discriminated against Black people, and I really doubt that. I just, they
certainly an interracial marriage would have. I mean, it's
exactly.
God, we're just barely climbing out of that as a culture,
right? I mean, and the U.S. is different because the U.S. and England have different histories about race, but I feel like there is something irresponsible about choosing to have a Black actress. We'll just talk about Jackie in particular, but having Jackie be Black and then not at all addressing that, because one could come out of watching this show and assume that there was nothing different in the experience of a working class Black woman than a working class white woman. And
so it
because
feels a little like a slap in the face potentially.
It just, I feel like it runs the risk of being misinformation. Like that somebody could come out of this and be like, oh, well, I saw this period thing from a book that was actually written then. And like, clearly there was no racism. It was just about class.
Oh, that's a good point. That is a good point, Daphne. I would not have thought of that.
It's a hard, and I don't want that to be an argument against casting people of color.
Yeah.
But if you cast one person of color in a cast that was in a story that everyone
if you're
else
adapting the story, then that could be an adaptive choice that you make.
That can,
and
you have to make those
lean
choices
into it
then.
And make the choice strong. Yeah, no,
right.
I think that's a very valid. And good
so
criticism.
had they incorporated anything about what the experience of a Black woman in London would have been at the time, I would be so on board there.
Yeah, just thrilled by it even.
Right,
yeah.
exactly. Or if they had chosen to go full on and just make this a colorblind cast, like do a Hamilton and just make everyone not be cast like white people like they were in the book. That's also a choice you can make. You can just say, we're just going to cast everyone with that view. But if you recast one character as Black when it's already about inequality and about class, then they're making a choice. Right.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I don't feel particularly well equipped to talk any more about it, but I think that it's valid to bring up and question.
I'm sorry, I totally hijacked your wanting to talk about Jackie. I mean, the actress who plays Jackie is fantastic. I feel a little bad that rather than just talking about her acting, I ended up having this whole thing basically about the writers and the writing and the choices that they made. So let's talk about her as an actress, because she is amazing as Jackie.
I love that the actress playing Jackie brings in this strength, I suppose, to the character that I did not see at all in the book. The book, she's very simpering. She's very needy. But I very much respected that conversation she had with Leonard about, are you going to make this right? And he came out looking like the asshole in that conversation. Whereas in the book, most of the time she came out looking needy and he came out looking harried. So.
And I think that the words are almost pared down, but I think the words are almost identical, actually.
And I love this about adaptation. I love that you can take word for word, lift straight out of a novel and put it into a human person who then delivers it and brings in all of this, just all of this nuance, and completely changes how you read the character. And the lines are all the same, but because of body language, because of delivery, just because of tone, they can absolutely change this person. And I think she did that gorgeously.
Well, and also because of point of view, because we are seeing, again, like we never are in Helen's point of view. So we always see her through Margaret's eyes. We only in the book ever see Jackie through Leonard's eyes. Or through Margaret's eyes. But you know what I mean?
That's
like in
true.
that scene in particular where they're talking, whenever they're home alone, we are seeing her through Leonard's point of view. So when you have, which
is diminishing.
Right, exactly. And when it's one of the interesting things about book to television or movie is that, yes, you can manipulate point of view. I mean, obviously most film is also happening in a point of view, but not to the same extent. So even though the words are different, even without this element of the acting and what the choices the actors make and the director, the fact that we know we're looking at it from Leonard's point of view already influences how we see. Like the minute you're in a character's head, you kind of are rooting for them. Even if they annoy you, to some extent, you're assessing all of the other characters based on how those characters influence the one in whose POV you are. Mm-hmm. Wow, that was a crazy sentence. But
I followed it completely. You're totally good.
So yes. Wow. So we have a lot, just like in the book, we have a lot of Jackie feelings.
A lot of Jackie feelings. Yep. That are complicated and uncomfortable.
That are very complicated and very uncomfortable. And that is an aspect of the book that I think that the show is doing beautifully.
The show did like much better.
Just in general, it's just like, this is going to be really pretty. And it's also going to make you super uncomfortable in ways that you should be super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think both book and show are doing that.
Yeah. I think that's fair to say.
Yes. Can we talk about Ruth? I always want to talk about Ruth Wilcox.
Yes, of course we can. Of course we can. Then we'll get back to my favorite.
Oh, we didn't do your favorite. No, do your favorite. Do your favorite, and then we'll go back. Then we'll go to Ruth.
Henry Wilcox. Matthew McFadden is so damn charming. Remember when I told you I was like, I don't like this character. Yep. I need him to put some skin on. I just cannot relate to this guy. He seems like
and
a
I
jerk.
told you that even Anthony Hopkins was like so much better than book Henry.
Which I still haven't seen. So I had to kind of take your word for that because that happens so often. Like you read a character and you just can't quite relate. And then you get a great actor doing the role and you feel like they humanize that character a little bit. But I was not expecting anything like Matthew McFadden just charming me every bit as much as he did the Schlegel sisters. Yep. I love when he says the most horrid things, but he says them so nicely. Yes. Like he comes into a room and I light up and I want to impress him and say something smart. And he challenges my opinion. And I think, is he right though? He's not right though, right? He's not right.
That is exactly the response.
It's exactly what you're supposed to feel about Henry Wilcox. And I feel it 100%. I think it's a perfect casting choice. Gorgeously done.
No, I totally
hope he
agree
gets
with
an award for it. I think it's fantastic.
I completely agree with you. And as much as I love Sir Anthony Hopkins, Matthew McFadden is definitely my Henry Wilcox. He's so good. Right. For exactly that reason, because
he's so charming.
And they have chemistry. Oh, wait, I guess I shouldn't say anything yet.
Oh, no.
Oh, whatever. The book's a million years ago. We already talked about the book.
The book's a million years ago that we already talked about. Plus, we just left off on the cliffhanger of whether or not she's going to accept what is certainly going to be a proposal.
Okay,
so
fine.
I think that we're there.
Right. They totally have chemistry. And and he is like you. I feel like there's an equalness here. Again, okay, we're going to put aside Ruth because we're going to have to talk about her separately. But there's you're supposed to love the Schlegels, even though you criticize them. But I feel like in this depiction in general of the Wilcoxes, you kind of get them. Because of Henry. I get or because of Henry and Ruth. Okay, the kids.
Because of Henry and Ruth.
Right.
Sure.
But it's I don't just see the Wilcoxes as this thing that we scorn.
Sure. As they're not so othered.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, totally there with you. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure I can pick favorites in the casting, but
That's okay.
But
Tibby also fantastic.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, it's really, the casting
so
has
good.
across the board been amazing. And but yes, it makes me really happy that I feel like it's more balanced than my experience of the book. Even though we talked a lot about how we felt like the book wasn't coming down on one side, but now I realize to some extent it was, because I felt like the Schlegels, and maybe just because I, grew up in a world more Schlegel-like than Wilcox-like myself. So, but I always came down like really feeling like the Schlegels have their faults, but that they're the good guys.
Sure. Huh. That's really interesting. I'm just nodding. I feel like I do really think that the book and the adaptation do beautifully about not delineating good guy, bad guy.
No, I don't mean really good guy, bad guy. No, just the ones that I feel like
these are the ones that's like, yes, this is where I relate. This is my safe space. I get that. Sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it was split for me just because I felt that I associated most with the Schlegels in where I am in my life now. Most with probably Leonard as far as like my social class. And then Henry Wilcox again reminded me so much of like the ideals and the presence of my father that I really was able to just like slip into either or any of the three POVs, I suppose. Or perspectives, rather.
Right, which I think that's the ideal way to experience the book for sure. And also the show. I mean, it's funny, the part that you read at the end of our discussion of the book, or no, not at the end, but the part you read in the middle was about Leonard thinking about the umbrella and thinking about how he had to consider the cost of each part of these things that were part of what was in his, like the things his heart wanted to do that weren't practical. I feel like we didn't actually get that, and I'm not sure how that should have, I'm not sure how they could have done it, but I did not experience that.
We didn't get it in the adaptation. I completely agree. That's why I said I had to explain it to the friend who was watching with me who just couldn't relate to him. And as soon as I told her about that particular speech, she was completely on board and got it. But I do think the adaptation missed it. I don't know how they could have gotten it better, but I do think they missed it.
Right. I mean, short of voiceover, which definitely...
nobody wants.
Nope.
Nobody wants that. Yeah.
Except in The Handmaid's Tale, which you've not seen. Like, The Handmaid's Tale is the one place where I'm just like, this is where I needed. Yeah.
Sure.
But yeah, and even it's our experience of the show is so informed by what we know from the book. Like the whole thing with the umbrella mix up and with Helen, like talking about how ratty the umbrella was that turns out to be his. Like, again, I feel like that scene tells us a lot about Helen, but not necessarily a lot about Leonard. But maybe more than I mean, it's hard. This is one of those things where it's like when you're really familiar with the source material, it's very hard to understand what the experience would be of a first-time watcher who's not.
Yeah.
This is, this is the same challenge I had all the time with Outlander. It's just like,
of course.
This is just, it's just like, and we just, delve deep into the book. So we're like so embedded in understanding it a certain way. Okay. Can we talk about Ruth?
Yes. Now we can talk about Ruth, the fantastic Julia Ormond, who I always love.
Yes. She's amazing. And
go ahead.
I feel like my most favorite aspects of Ruth were like skimmed, but didn't really get there.
Oh, interesting. I thought they did it beautifully. I love that our very first image of her was through the wavy mirror glass, and it felt to me very much like that emerging from Therry.
Okay, good. I don't know why. I mean, it's funny. And I think I sent you the GIF, like, I was just, when I was looking up GIFs, I had the GIF of one of the GIFs that showed up was the opening credits
like
of the film.
Trains, sure.
Right. The opening credits of the film where you have Vanessa Redgrave's name over the actual dress trailing through the mud. And I was like, that's what I want.
Yeah. No, that's perfectly understandable.
And it was just like, I really wanted her to really feel earthier, which
Ethereal.
is not right, which is not
interesting. You said earthier.
Yes.
I said ethereal.
No, I want earthy because
Yes,
that's for
okay.
me what she means.
Sure. Okay.
But so we didn't really get that. So like, yeah, my whole
guess.
my archetypal thing didn't really pan out so well. Like she doesn't feel like she's of the earth. She's very important. Like I will now talk about what I do love about how they depicted her. But
Okay.
her whole thing of like her being of the earth and Henry Wilcox being kind of a more animal nature, like that's
Sure.
the beauty of the depiction of him took away all of that kind of wolfiness, all of that like
no, that's fair. That's fair to say.
which I'm okay with that. Like that in the case
Yeah.
of Henry Wilcox, that's a trade-off that totally works for me. With Ruth, I would have loved a little bit more actual connection with the earth, like real.
Yeah. I did like that again when we first saw her, she was kind of in the wavy glass, and then we immediately had her described as a creature of a very different sort.
Absolutely. Yes. No, they did a lovely job with that. And I love the depiction of how the discussion of strength. And this was one of the things where I kind of resisted going back to the book to see if this comes up in the same way in the book. But can I go through, like, there's a few lines that are really interesting about both Henry and Ruth, which I think is a really interesting choice they made. Either choice by writing their own lines or choice of which lines they chose to focus on.
Sure. Okay.
And I don't know which it is. So when Helen is describing, you actually quoted part of it off the top of your head. When Helen's describing Henry Wilcox to Margaret, he said the thing about how she says that he says the most horrid things so nicely. But the second part of it, she said, like all really strong people, he did it without hurting me.
Yes.
Which
that was beautiful.
Fascinating.
Was that in the book? I don't remember that line.
I don't know. I
specifically.
should have looked up if that's in the book.
I feel
don't
like I
know.
would have remembered that line.
Yeah, I feel like I would have remembered.
Lovely.
I feel like I would remember it too because it's exactly the kind of thing that you and I are both really interested in personalities and
Yes.
interactions.
Mm-hmm.
But then she goes on to say, which I know is in the book, talk about how it's Ruth that actually is running the family. That
Right.
everyone defers to Ruth. So that aspect of it really, they did get that, that she is this, just thinking of a Black Sails line, because my head's always in Black Sails, power that just is.
Yes.
Like,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yes,
this,
absolutely.
This idea that Ruth has an authority that transcends the kind of authority that people try to build for themselves. That Henry would build through making good arguments as gentle as he is doing them or as nicely, and the authority that Tibby, just is trying to exude all the time with his very factualness,
Yes.
and the kind of authority that the Schlegel women are trying to, I think, exert through their goodness. I mean, in a way, it's almost like their intellectualism and their philosophical natures are a way to exert some sort of authority. Like, remember, we also talked in our discussion of the book about how it's so easy to criticize women who want to help, but who actually have no power. They may have money. Like, remember we were saying
sure.
we were censoring them for wanting to give money to Leonard, but that's all they have because they don't have the
Right.
vote. They don't have political power. They don't have anything. All they can do is influence men.
Right.
So they're trying to influence men or philosophy generally and culture, but Ruth just is. So
I do like that.
That aspect, they did tap into the thing that I love about Ruth. So there is still this element of her. I almost think of her like a pillar. Like she's like a pillar in this one, or like a really old tree. Like she's just,
Oh, sure.
she's just there.
Mm-hmm.
And her authority just is. And I really love that. And wait, where was the next? There was another bit. Oh, right. After the luncheon, when I really liked that. I mean, I love that dynamic in the book also, but I really love the dynamic where Margaret's just so embarrassed about just, what did because she said they were like yammering like monkeys or something like that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that Ruth just absorbs it. She's just like, this is fine. Like, I'm used to this. This is what people do around me. And I don't participate, but that doesn't mean that I'm suffering. Like, she just has this essence that really speaks to me. I just love Ruth a lot.
She's wonderful. I love that they put her in purple so often.
Right. That too. Back to the colors is that she is in purple. She's regal.
Yeah. She's very regal. Absolutely. Yeah. It's gorgeously done.
It is gorgeously done. I know. I love it very much. She's in purple when she's out in town. Like, that's her outdoor London attire. She's in like really, really natural, like undyed colors when she's at Howard's End
and linens and things.
Exactly.
Yes.
So when she's inside of her apartment in London, within her space, or at Howard's End, which is obviously her space, then she's actually in not just neutrals, like she's in, and not the black and white of London,
right?
But she's in natural colors.
That's a good point. What did you think about everybody at the funeral bringing white flowers, except for Margaret, who brought red?
Right. And I think that was their way of, I mean, they did have the talk about the chrysanthemums, but remember, like, there's a whole thing about how they were like basically saying how gauche it was for Margaret to have brought chrysanthemums. Mm-hmm. And that they did have that in the show, but I feel like this was
well, maybe it seemed right to her or something. Yeah,
right, exactly, because she's
it was
German.
Good of her to come at all,
right? Because she's German. Like, they actually tied that into her being German. Like, maybe that's a
German
thing.
That's so interesting because I feel like they brought in like the German racism without batting an eye, and maybe that.
Anyway. But that's in the book. I mean, it
is in the book.
That is in the book, and would that have been? I don't know. It's very hard to like talk about what the cultural construction of race was in different times, because it was very different, and we don't really know. Like, we're just so it's like the discussion of the casting of Jackie is a now question. The question of what race and different European groups and whether they were seen as different races back then is a then question that I can't really answer. I really felt like the depiction of when Ruth asked Margaret to come to Howard's End and the sudden impulsiveness of that, it just moved me so much here. Like, as much as in the book, or at least as much as in the book. Yeah. I still feel like I need to spend a lot of time thinking about that, because you have Ruth as this person who seemingly exists outside of emotion. Wait, oh, right. There's a whole discussion about that. But then, maybe that ties into the red flowers. Maybe I've always thought about what Ruth represents for Margaret and how Ruth is helping Margaret become the woman she needs to be. But maybe that is what Margaret is offering Ruth. So when in the second episode, when they're talking about the Wilcoxes, that Margaret and Helen go, down their road about talking about how emotions and the personal is what really matters. And then Helen's explanation of the Wilcoxes, of her experience of them after the awkwardness of her,
awkward morning.
Right? And she said that the Wilcoxes were undone because the main force in the room was invisible to them, and she called that a whirlwind of emotion.
Huh? Yeah.
And so perhaps that is what Margaret offered Ruth, and that's why Ruth was inspired to have this moment of like almost like childish impulsiveness when she wanted Margaret so badly to come to Howard's End, just completely impromptu.
Just that Margaret would understand in a way that her family didn't, would see it in a way that her family didn't, because she sort of spoke that language.
Maybe, or that she reawakened that aspect of
that's lovely.
That she reawakened that aspect of Ruth, that Ruth had been, again, right, that Yeah, I guess I'm always coming from this perspective that Ruth is somehow this kind of like, she is the integrated person. She has the potential to be, but maybe she had forgotten part of herself.
I was going to say, I don't necessarily see that because she demurs so often, because she says, I leave the thinking to other people, or I leave the vote to other people.
Okay, so that's going back to this idea that like this Ruth Margaret combo is actually the most integrated person.
That I like.
Okay, so maybe it's not remembering it. Maybe it's that Margaret sparks that in her, and that's what she needed.
Sure, unlocks a door.
Right. Mm-hmm. Huh. It's so fascinating. I could talk about that dynamic forever, clearly, because I keep bringing us back to them. I really love it. Again, what I'm so aware of in this 2 episodes so far is the choices they made. I mean, I guess all adaptation is basically like cutting away when you're going from a book to something that is 4 episodes.
Adaptation is basically cutting away.
Because you have all of this stuff and you have to choose which stuff.
I don't know if I would agree with that, though, because it's so transformational into the visual medium, because there's no visual medium in the novels.
Sure, but you're cutting away.
Translating?
It's not exactly. Yes, that's the word to visual part. Yes, translation is part of it, but part of it is you have to choose which things are not essential, which is choosing which are the most essential. Like that's part of the process.
So maybe concentrating. Sure.
I still think of it as cutting away. I mean, it's like sculpting. I
can't think of it as cutting away because so much is added to it.
Right. I think that I agree with you on the visual part, but I think you're seeing cutting away in a different way than I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it like, this is how my grandmother explains sculpting. Mm-hmm. She used to, when she was younger, sculpt in stone, and she would have a giant stone and she would cut away what wasn't the sculpture.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's the way she looked at it. So I don't mean cutting away like tossing out. I don't mean it that way. It's not, and I guess that could be a synonym with concentration. But for me, I feel like it's slightly different than concentration, because concentration is taking everything and making it into something more dense. You're right. Mm-hmm. And they're not making it more dense necessarily. There are things that get left on the cutting floor. It's like editing. Yeah. It's like when you edit a television show or a movie. Certain things end up being deleted scenes or whatever. So those are always choices, and they're not negative choices. It's getting to the essence of what the person doing the adaptation is trying to do. So I don't mean cutting away in a negative way, but what's interesting is when all of the stuff gets cut away that was in the book that didn't end up in the adaptation, that is the person doing the adaptation making a statement about what they see as the essence, what is the most important parts. So especially in a book as dense as this book, becoming 4 hours, which was...
Well, yeah. And if you'll remember, my biggest criticism of the book was that it was too long.
It was, yes. And yet still, like, a lot of stuff. But what's interesting to me, we haven't gotten to all this discussion of what this means. What's interesting to me is that they managed with all of this adaptation, and I'm going to continue with this term, cutting away, certain things in these 2 episodes came up multiple times. Like this question of strength, of who are strong people and what that means, like how... And I don't mean like overbearing. Like this isn't the class question necessarily. It's about an inner strength. So it's so that's one of the things that came up. The color thing came up over and again. They're like, there's certain things that ended up being repeated. So those ones were it was just interesting to me to see which things ended up being the ones that in the adaptation were really the most important.
Right.
Because you know what I mean? Because despite so much of it getting taken away, certain things really repeat themselves even.
Yes.
Which, as you know, is something I really enjoy, watching what gets repeated in a narrative. Mm-hmm. It's just fascinating to me.
Another thing that works for me really well adaptively is the camera looking in the windows. We did this looking at the Schlegels very often, and we did it particularly when Bast was out walking. And it did beautifully for like that separation, the delineation. And of course we saw, I said before, Mrs. Wilcox through the window the first time. It was so wavy. And then there was a time when we were looking in at Henry Wilcox through a window. And every time we did, it was really kind of showing how different this person's perspective is than the last person we just saw. We also often see Leonard Bast, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we see Leonard Bast looking out windows more often.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
So that's beautifully done. That kind of showing a class division almost, just showing the division between the characters through windows was beautifully done.
Well, also who we like to look in at someone through a window is to examine them, and to look out from a window is to feels to me like aspiration, which we had a lot of Margaret doing in the book, of her looking out windows at the countryside.
That's right. We sure do. And we do get that too, of her looking out of the train. Gosh, those train sequences. Unnecessarily beautiful. This show is so gorgeous.
It is very beautiful. I know. I want all of the clothes.
And they hold really beautiful tight focuses sometimes where everything else is blurred. And again, the color red, so beautifully done.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I wanted to, a continuation of the color thing. I found the two lunches very interesting. I mean, those both lunches happen in the book as well, but they're really back to back again because of adaptation and needing to cut stuff away. You end up with these two lunches very close together. I love that one of them is on invitation of the Wilcoxes, and that's the only time we see Margaret wear black and white.
That's right. She sure does.
Yes, she
what
does.
A good point. Yeah.
Yes. And then she meets with Helen afterwards, and Helen's of course still wearing red because Helen
so much
always
red.
wears
the
red.
Most red
right.
We've always seen it.
Right.
We've ever even seen in Helen. Yeah.
And then when Henry goes to, I love this idea of like this. Just it feels so modern too. Like you can totally imagine like some these two like some hippie chick who's like dating some.
These are the hipsters.
She's dating a suit, and she's just like challenges him, like like some Brooklyn hipster dating some like Wall Street dude, and it's just like,
yes,
come to my place where like we eat raw kale.
Right.
With kale juice on the side. It's like so that scenario.
Yes,
and then she's like, damn, he was game for it.
It's true. And she was being very provocative, trying just like, you're going to hate it. Come anyway.
Right. Exactly.
And he comes in, he's very good about it. It's actually quite good. It's quite good.
Exactly.
Oh, I loved him. Matthew McFadden.
And then at that second lunch, she's wearing red again because she's on her turf. She's in her emotional space, of this world of challenging. And I really liked it. I wanted to talk about the part right before the part that I talked about the personal and the Wilcoxes not knowing what to do with the personal. I don't know if this line is the way it is in the book, but I thought that Meg really summed up so many of their conversations when she said that she feels like that the sisters are chattering away at the edge of the great abyss. And she says that she doesn't want to close her eyes to that abyss, but she also doesn't want to be in it. So there's a lot of great talk about being in the world or not in the world, of the world or not of the world. Not just from them. I believe that Henry at some point says it also. Oh, right. Margaret tells him that he takes the poetry out of everything, and that he says, but you see civilization. Like this one, this was also great. Like this whole thing about them sitting and watching the sunlight on the water.
Yeah.
And then he just totally calls her on it. He's just like, yeah, that whole thing about that. Like, let me tell you about the water and like how you have more sunlight because of industry and all this stuff. Right. And he's basically says like, you and all of your poetry, you are poeticizing the world, but you're not of it. You're not in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And not seeing the whole picture.
Right.
I think. And also specifically closing your eyes to certain parts of the picture.
Yes.
That's very interesting.
Right. Well, that's the thing. To stand on the edge of the abyss, she doesn't want to close her eyes, but she's kind of saying, but I do, because I don't want to be part of it.
Right. She wants to be comfortable.
Mm-hmm. She wants to be comfortable, and part of her comfort is to live in the theoretical. And that's part.
Oh, sure. Or the romanticization. Yeah.
Right. But so if if you just sit in your parlor and, have your servants serve you lovely cakes and tea while you talk about the plight of all the people.
Oh,
yep.
Yeah.
You can make yourself feel like you're part of it, but you're not actually part of it.
That's hard. Yeah, I have been. Well, it's like when you know that you've been guilty of these things, and you're just like, shit, being called out on it.
No, but I mean, that's what I loved about the book. Remember, we talked about that we were critical of the Schlegels of doing that for Leonard, but then we're critical of Leonard of doing that at Jackie.
Yeah.
So it's just, I feel like, I kind of came out, there was some point in our discussion last time where I said, I grew up in college where I was that person who was like, social justice warrior, but like from my comfortable, very fancy college.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And again, I mean, it's, it's very easy to like cringe at that. But at the same time, like it comes from a good place. So it's just like, I just feel like the book is like, does this in me, or the story, now both versions, does an amazing thing of like calling people on their shit, but also recognizing the goodness in them.
Yeah. No, it's gently done. Like all strong people, he does it without hurting us.
This is a strong show. It is strong in its use of color and theme. No, it's totally true. It's really, it's very interesting that way.
I have a question about an adaptive choice. I don't know if you noticed or not. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that when Bast comes in to visit while Mr. Wilcox is already there, that he recognizes the name Wilcox.
Wait, no, you mean when Wilcox comes to visit when Bast is already
there. Yes,
that's what you meant. Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with you.
That had to be what happened, right? Because he was immediately so very uncomfortable and almost called him out on something.
The scene plays out the exact same way in the book.
Really?
Yep.
I didn't notice it then at all.
Right. Because you see faces. I mean, this is one of those things. Because you see faces, those faces have to actually have a reaction, and you have to,
sure,
and the one you can judge.
Okay, yeah.
I feel I definitely replayed that because I also had the same feeling, and I think it can go either way. I mean, we know from the book, in the book world, in the universe of the book, Leonard Bast does not know things that we're going to find out in later episodes. And it's just not clear. Like, it could just be extreme discomfort. Like, because they were already making him really uncomfortable. Like, and
that's true.
They were already,
and now
like,
just more outnumbered.
Right. And then it was just like, now even fancier people showed up, and
exactly.
like, he's just like, get me the hell out of here. But I think possible. He was already, I think really, even though we both saw it, for me, it felt like it was more about the fact that he thought he was being invited to talk literature and music when he was invited to be a social experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And then having wealthy people show up and be witness to that was just a million times more horrifying for him than...
Yeah, and humiliating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like, that was the shock that got him to be like, okay, let me get the hell out of here.
Right.
And again, and then we get to that hat scene, which I just feel like was perfect.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the scene with Jackie, too, where so much prejudice is showed, and they're like, oh, the one we thought was going to steal the silver.
Right.
And no one stole anything. But you just see, and then when she's getting ready to leave, and she says, Len's going to be so upset. And Helen says, oh, will he strike you? And she's like, my Len.
Right.
No. And just
I think
so
it was
uncomfortable.
I think she was actually like, she wasn't just no, she was like, no, fuck you.
Yeah, she was completely offended,
so.
And she was wrong. Or rather, Helen was wrong. Yeah, Jackie was right.
She also did that thing where she was sad and mortified and a little bit afraid and angry all at the same time.
Yes.
I mean, it
was haunting. It was so gorgeously done. I felt so deeply uncomfortable.
Right.
It was wonderful.
Well, and I could so relate to her. I mean, it's just like something that she did she just was so freaked out and thinking that he was having an affair maybe, or missing, or, it's just like, it's not like she walked away going, oh, great. Okay. Now she still didn't know where he was. She still had all this fear And so it felt so real. It felt much more so than in the book. Even though I could kind of read into the book again, we are never in Jackie's POV. She's always an object in the book. She's never really a subject in the book. Which again, I think that in the book that was used so beautifully to make us feel uncomfortable in a way that we're supposed to feel uncomfortable. But this actress took that and like took the reins of it and made us possibly even more uncomfortable with her agency, like with the fact that she was like, she filled that room. She was just so there and so full of all of the emotions that I think almost anyone could relate to in that situation.
Yeah, no, I would agree. It was beautifully done.
Yeah, no, she's incredible. All right. Shall we move on to favorite things, or is there another? I feel like there's more stuff I want to talk about, but we are going to cover the second 2 episodes.
That's right.
So it's like, things. So if there's stuff that we afterwards feel like, oh damn, we really want to talk about that, we can always bring that in 2 weeks when we talk about the second 2 episodes. Yeah, definitely going to be paying attention to color.
I was going to say my favorite thing has been the use of color, but I think my favorite scene would be right after the breakup, right after the engagement has fallen through, and we have Margaret and Helen. Helen is reclined and recounting her story, and Margaret is sitting on the bed and kind of just being this reassuring presence. And then in comes Tibby, who wants to snuggle up, and then everybody just kind of gets all snuggly together, and we have Margaret as like this the protector and the comforter. And just to see this lovely, intimate family is gorgeous.
Right. I probably would have picked the same, but I'm going to guess I pick a kind of riff off of that and just say that I love the depiction that don't feel like we got in the book. Like we had the connection with the sisters, but they chose to make Tibby more part of the connection.
Yes.
In the show, and like the whole thing with the piano, with like the 2 younger siblings kind of, doing battling piano numbers. And, it just so worked for me because in contrast to the Wilcoxes, like the Wilcoxes, we have the whole thing of them doing activities. So they all like, they're also very much in sync with each other. Like they feel, both family groups feel like they have their own family culture and that everyone fits well in their own family culture. I mean, possibly except for Ruth, who just, is just kind of being. She is just her own
Although
thing.
It's a lovely, heartwarming scene when they find her at the railway station and are so surprised to see her. And it's like, what in the name of all that's wonderful are you doing here? And she just is thrilled to have her family.
Yes. Oh, no, she loves her family. She's part of her family. And I mean, just both times where she both at the table arguing about equality and also at the fight in the car when the aunt comes, just watching Ruth Wilcox just create order.
Yes, power that just is.
Yep,
I think you said it beautifully.
Power that just is. Thank you, Black Sails creators.
Forever and ever.
Forever and ever, for putting the best words in my mouth. But yeah, I loved that it feels like the Wilcoxes are kind of in sync, but they're all doing their own thing. Whereas to me, Margaret, Helen, Tibby family, the Schlegels, are somehow more almost like bound to each other. Like there's like this kind of invisible thread that's tying the 3 of them together, even when they're totally annoyed by Tibby, but they just seem like one organism.
Oh, yeah. No, I like that very much. Yes.
So that's my favorite thing. I mean, and Ruth.
Lovely.
Always.
And Ruth also. Who only gets 1 episode out of the 4.
Yeah, well, it's the same in the book. The same thing you exactly said about the book. You're like, why do we get so little of this amazing character?
Exactly.
But you kind of have to,
but
because
she resonates.
Right, exactly. Her absence and her presence in her absence continues to be really important part of the story.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
And, with the whole goddess imagery that I went into a lot in the discussion of the book is there always is a Mrs. Wilcox
Yes. Mm-hmm.
at Howard's End. And we will talk about that and how they did it or didn't do it in 2 weeks.
Next time on Can I Just Say?
Yes, next time on Can I Just Say, a continuation of great adaptations, we will be talking about episodes 3 and 4 of the limited series of Howard's End.
Beautiful. Thank you again so much for listening. A reminder, you can support us on Patreon, just $1 a month or more, which really helps us to continue doing the work that we're doing and to take care of a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff that nobody knows about but us. But it's a great deal of work that our lovely Daphne especially puts into everything. You can find more from us at commonroomradio.com. Please do leave us a review on iTunes. We'll be sure to read it in the next episode. Until next time, from Common Room Radio, I'm Elizabeth Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive. Can I Just Say podcast is a Common Room Radio production. For more information and our other shows, visit commonroomradio.com. To show your support, pledges of as little as $1 a month can make a big difference. Visit patreon.com/commonroomradio to pledge support and access bonus features that are just for patrons. And join the conversation by using the hashtag CanIJustSay and follow us on Twitter at JustSayPodcast. We request that you keep your tweets respectful and positive, and you can always email us at podcast@commonroomradio.com. Thanks for listening.